My name is Fanny Charles and I'm the editor of the Blackmore Vale magazine, and I was asked to chair this. It came slightly out of the blue actually, and I'm very honoured. I'm now going to introduce Percy to you. Percy's from Bruno, Saskatchewan, and he is going to tell you his experience of growing canola, farming for 50 years as an arable farmer in the Great Plains. Over to Percy.
Well, thank you very much. I really have to thank everyone involved for bringing me, first of all, to England, then to Wales, and now back to England. Anyway, I come, as was mentioned, from the heart of the prairies, province of Saskatchewan, and also in the heart of the grain-growing area of the prairies. Maybe I should give a little background, my wife and myself. We were known as seed developers and seed savers in rapeseed. If I use the word canola, which we do in Canada, then you'll know I'm talking one and the same, rapeseed or canola. So we were seed developers in rapeseed, and we have done that for over 50 years, where we're developing new varieties of rapeseed suitable for our climatic soil conditions, but more important for various diseases we had in rapeseed back on the prairies. I had also been involved in other things. I was also a member of the provincial parliament. I was an MLA. And in my role in government, I had been involved primarily in agriculture, representing my province on the provincial level, but also on the federal level in rules, laws, regulations that I thought would always benefit farmers. I was also a member, or also mayor and councillor of my town for over 30 years, again involved in agriculture. So I really come from an agricultural background. I should say, when I said used the word we, I meant also my wife, because she had a great role in helping in developing new varieties of seeds and plants. So basically on the prairies, we were known seed developers, seed savers, like hundreds of thousands of farmers who used their seed from year to year and were developing them primarily in rapeseed. We also did work in the area of pulse crops, but in peas. So 1996, GMOs were introduced into Canada and United States at the same time. Regulatory approval was given by the Government of Canada, and there were 4 crops introduced at that time, and that was soya, corn or maize, cotton, and especially by us, rapeseed. So those were the first crops that were introduced. And what I am hearing in many parts of the world, especially Europe, now and in the last 6-7 months, were things that we heard in Canada, not only from the corporations, but also from the federal government. We would have increased yields. It would be more nutritious, but most of all, I think what caught the farmer's ear was less chemical use. And believe me, on the prairies where we're using chemicals by the hundreds of tons each year, which a lot of damage to our environment, but also to human health. I think the whole issue of GMOs can be divided into many, many parts, but I'll try and concentrate on some of them this evening. First of all, you have the food issue. You have the environmental issue. You have the loss of biodiversity. You have the patent laws, intellectual property rights versus farmers' rights. So there's many, many issues that arise when you introduce GMOs. I'll go into immediately briefly what has happened to my wife and myself 2 years after the introduction of GMOs, which I said occurred in 1996. In 1998, Monsanto laid what they called a patent infringement lawsuit against my wife and myself. At that point in time, we had never, ever nothing to do with Monsanto. We didn't even know anybody from Monsanto. We had never gone to a meeting or so. So when they laid that patent infringement lawsuit, they said this: we were grown Monsanto's GMO rapeseed without a license from them. And as I said, we had never, ever nothing to do with them. And that came as a great shock, because we realized as seed developers that possibly the canola that we were developing for 50 years was now contaminated with a GMO which we surely did not want. And we said to Monsanto at the time, if you have contaminated our rapeseed that we have worked so long for, you should be guilty, there should be a liability here, and you should pay for the damages. Now, patent laws in Canada, like many countries of the world, come under federal jurisdiction. So by standing up to Monsanto, it went to Federal Court of Canada with one judge. And how often we wished later on that we could have had a judge and jury with farmers on that knew and understood farming, but that was not to be. So in the 2 years of pre-trial, before it went to the main trial, Monsanto admitted that we had never ever used their seed or bought their seed, but they said because they had contaminated us through patent law, they own our seeds and plants. That is the basis. It went to federal court. So what the trial judge ruled is what made the case become internationally known overnight all over the world, and it was the first case on patent infringement on a gene or a higher life form. This is what the judge ruled, and I'll just tell you briefly some of it. He ruled it does not matter how anyone, in my case, a farmer, how you are contaminated. And he went on to say how this could happen. He said cross-pollination, with pollen flown in the wind, bees, birds, or whatever, or by direct seed movement, seeds blown in the wind, transportation by farmers, hauling it to the farm, hauling it to the market, and so on. And he said if that happens, a farmer no longer owns the seeds or plants, and under patent law, they become the ownership, in this case, of Monsanto. You can imagine how we felt when we lost 50 years of research and development overnight to Monsanto. He also ruled we were not allowed to use our seeds and plants again because of the contamination. Another ruling, it does not matter, he said, the level of contamination. If it's 0.5%, if it's 1% or 2% or 8%, you no longer own your seeds or plants. So that was what the ruling was, and it was unbelievable, and that's what I said, what made the case become known throughout the world, how an organic farmer, a conventional farmer, could wake up tomorrow morning, no longer own his seeds or plants if he's contaminated by his neighbor or anybody else. We then decided to fight it, and we then took it or applied to the Federal Court of Appeal. And after a year or 2 years, we were granted leave for appeal that we could take it to the Federal Court of Appeal. Now we have 3 judges. But in the Federal Court of Appeal, especially in Canada, you can only discuss points of law or facts of law where the trial judge erred in law. So we could not bring any other items in. And after 2 years of legal battle, the Federal Court of Appeal ruled in favor of the trial judge, although they didn't agree with all of what the trial judge had come down with. And at that point in time, under law, it should have been thrown out because they did not agree all with the trial judges, or without the first trial judge. Now, so this is what happened. And as I said, it should have been thrown out at that time. We then lost twice. 4 years of legal battle, spent about $300,000, and then we had the one final of avenue or one avenue of appeal left, and that was the Supreme Court of Canada. But our lawyers told us that we have maybe 10 or 11% chance that the Supreme Court of Canada would ever hear it because we had lost in the 2 previous trials. So we made the application anyway, and it was one of the greatest news after 5 years when the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in our favor that they would hear the case. So now we're in between the Federal Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court of Canada agreeing to hear the case. Then Monsanto lays another lawsuit against us for $1 million, where they said they wanted all their legal bills up to that point in time paid for. They wanted license fees, they wanted punitive damage, because they said we were stubborn, we were and arrogant, that we wouldn't submit to what Monsanto wanted. So we had another lawsuit. If that was not bad enough, about 4 months later, they laid another lawsuit where they wanted to seize all our farmland, our house and all our farm equipment so they could stop us from mortgaging our land to fight the legal battle. So we have 3 lawsuits by the time it went to the Supreme Court of Canada. Now, at the Supreme Court, we had the privilege to bring other items in. And now I will read some of the other items we brought into the Supreme Court of Canada. Number 1, can living organisms, seeds, plants, genes, human organs be owned and protected by corporate patents on intellectual property? Number 2, can genetic modified traits invade noxious weeds and become noxious weeds that then become resistant to weed killers? We now call them in Canada super weeds, and our whole country now is full of it. Number 3, can farmers' right to grow conventional or organic crops be protected? Number 4, can farmers keep the ancient right to save their own seeds and develop them further if they so wish? But the most important issue to my wife and myself by that time is that who owns life? Has any individual, any corporation the right to put a patent on life and control life? To us, life was sacred, and we said no one should have that right. So those were the issues that were put to the Supreme Court. This is what the Supreme Court ruled. Number 1, the court ruled that because we had not had any benefit by being contaminated, we did not have to pay Monsanto no money. Also, the fact that we had never used Monsanto's herbicide Roundup on our crop, we did not really use the patent. But what was not fair, the Supreme Court ruled Monsanto has to pay their legal bill, my wife and I have to pay our legal bill. Our legal bill was over $400,000 by then, 7 years of our life, and Monsanto's bill was $2 million. And believe me, it's a lot easier for a corporation, $1 billion corporation plus, to pay $2 million in court fees and legal fees for a test case where they said they wanted to see how far they could exercise patent law over the rights of farmers, than for my wife and I to stand up for the rights of farmers and ourselves to pay $400,000. So that was not fair by the Supreme Court of Canada. Now, on the issue of life, what they ruled is still in effect at this moment yet in Canada. And this is very important, the next sentence I'm going to say. Monsanto's patent on a gene or higher life form is valid. And wherever that gene arises, by whatever means, in any higher life form, they own and control that higher life form. Now think of the implications of that. How far can you go with the patents on life? Can you go all the way to, as far as a human being? The Supreme Court then went on and said it has to go back to the Parliament of Canada to bring in new laws, new regulations on the regards to the patents on life and the sacredness of life. Also, they said laws have to be brought in to protect the rights of farmers. So that is where it stands now in Canada. Now, we believe that Monsanto at that time thought they had a major victory when the Supreme Court ruled they owned and control a higher life form. But as was mentioned before, if you own and control a higher life form and you put it in the environment like a seed or a plant where you cannot control it, then you should be liable for the damages. And now we've entered a new era of liability. So we were watching our fields very closely after the decision from the Supreme Court. And sure enough, in the year 2005, we noticed that one of our fields, which was a very small field of 50 acres, which we were using for mustard research, there were canola plants growing on that field in the fall of 2005. We did some testing, and through testing, we realized that it was a strong possibility it was Monsanto's GMOs, again, rapeseed, in our field. So we notified Monsanto and said, we think that we have been contaminated by you again in one of our fields that we're going to be using for mustard research. And in all the trials they said, that if a farmer feels he is contaminated with Monsanto's GMO genes, all he has to do is notify Monsanto, and they would come out and remove the offending plants or the seeds or plants. So we notified Monsanto, and indeed 2 days later they did come out. We had staked out 10 or 12 plants where we had sprayed Roundup on. They took samples from those plants, they took samples from other plants in this 50 acres, and we also got copies of everything that they took. 2 days later, they notified us and said, yes, indeed, it's their GMO rapeseed again on our field, and they asked us what we wanted to have done with the contamination. And we had told Monsanto what we had planned to use that field for the following year. And we said to Monsanto, we want every plant, every rapeseed plant on this 50 acres removed by hand. And they agreed to do that. And 2 days later, my wife gets a fax from Monsanto. I was not home. And in that fax was called a release form. But there was a whole paragraph in that release form blacked out. My wife contacted Monsanto and said, there is no way we're going to sign a release form unless we can read the whole document. They then sent the complete document without the paragraph being blacked out. This is what it said in that blacked out paragraph. My wife, myself, or any member of our family could never ever take Monsanto to court again for the rest of our lives, no matter how much they contaminated us in the future on that field. And we said, no way. But the most important thing was they had also a gag order. My wife, myself, or any member of our family could never ever talk to the press or anyone what the terms of settlement were. And we said to Monsanto, there is no way we're ever going to give up our freedom of speech, and we refuse to sign it. Monsanto said then, we will not remove the plants. The battle was on. And so we said to Monsanto, we are going to remove the plants ourselves before the pods ripen and the seeds get into our soil. And they sent us a fax back and said, we wish to remind you that those plants on your field are our property, and you're not allowed to do with those plants what you want. So we notified Monsanto and said, get your property off of our property, you're trespassing. So it went back and forth, and finally, before the pods went into seed, we, with the help of 2 neighbors, we physically removed all the canola plants from 50 acres, and we notified Monsanto when we were doing this. I paid my neighbor $640 to help, and then we sent Monsanto the bill. And Monsanto refused to pay it unless we signed the release form. So it went on back and forth for about a year. Oh, in the meantime, they also sent us a fax and said, we wish to remind you that it would be in your best interest not to seed mustard in that field the following year because of the contamination. You can really not sort out canola or rapeseed from mustard seed. So then we said to Monsanto, now you are telling us what we can do or not do with our land. I said, we own the land, we pay the taxes on the land, we're going to do what we want with our own land. So anyway, sent in the bill, they wouldn't pay it, so went to a judge, and then we thought, what way can we bring them to court? We had enough of 7 years of legal battle. And my wife and I talked it over seriously, and we then were prepared to go back to court if it had to be for another 7 years of living hell. We made that decision, and then we decided what court would we take Monsanto to, and we decided on small claims court. And in small claims court, if a judge issues a summons, we have Monsanto in court immediately. We don't have to have any pre-trial. We did that. The judge agreed with us, signed a summons against Monsanto, and we had $1 billion corporation in court on a $640 bill. So in March of this year, the judge had set a date. We went into court When the judge came in, Monsanto's lawyer and Monsanto got up and said, we will settle out of court. They had a check in hand for the $640 plus $20 cost. And it was the greatest victory for us after 10 years now of legal battle, where now we have a precedent set where a corporation now has accepted liability and now opens a door for farmers all over the world, whether it's Bayer, Syngenta, or whatever, that you have some legal avenue to take a corporation to court if you are contaminated. So that's, like I said, after 10 years of legal battle, it was a great victory, not only for ourselves, but for farmers all over the world. So that's the issue of what we went through and our lawsuits with Monsanto. Now let's go back to GMOs. 1996 introduced, and 1998 the lawsuit. I will say to you this evening some things that will really surprise you. First of all, there is absolutely no coexistence if you ever introduce GMOs in whatever crop it's introduced. There is no such thing as containment. You cannot contain pollen flow, seeds blown in the wind, transportation, or so. Whether the contamination is by pollen flow with bees or with wind or whatever, or seeds blown hundreds of miles. There is no such thing as coexistence. There is no longer a choice. You no longer have a choice. It all becomes GMOs in a matter of a few years. To give you how bad it is now in Canada with GMOs, in those 4 crops, but primarily on rapeseed and soya, we no longer have any pure rapeseed left in Canada. Our total seed stock now is all GMO. You cannot raise a GMO-free canola crop in Canada, nor can you raise a soya-free conventional crop anymore organically. So it all now is GMO in Canada, soya and rapeseed. So an organic farmer, a conventional farmer no longer has a choice. If you want to seed rapeseed in Canada, all the seed stocks are now contaminated with GMOs. Now, the other important issue that has come out, and that has been out now already at least 4 years. Rapeseed comes from the brassica family. It has very close cousins as well as distant cousins. Close cousins, radishes, turnips, cauliflower, and other plants. Distant cousins, mustard, wild mustard. Through cross-pollination, the GMO gene from rapeseed is now into those market garden crops, making more crops organic farmers no longer can raise in Canada. So, as I said, if you introduce GMOs, you will totally eventually destroy the organic farmers. You might as well tell the organic farmers it's over if you ever introduce GMOs. So those are the crops that are totally contaminated in North America. The bright side of it, on the other side of the coin, is this. Because we realize the dangers of introducing those first 4 crops, no new crops in Canada have been introduced since 1996. We've had 13 years of crops now of GMOs in those first 4 crops that I mentioned. They wanted to bring in GMO wheat, GMO flax, GMO rice, GMO alfalfa, and it was not allowed in Canada because we've seen the damage what the first 4 crops have done. Believe me, if GMO wheat would ever be introduced into North America or in any part of the world, you would totally destroy the organic farmer because wheat comes from the grass family. It's bad enough with rapeseed, but let alone wheat. And so it was not allowed in Canada. Now, there's many other issues. The Terminator was mentioned. What it has really meant is to get total control over the seed supply and then the food supply. Monsanto now is the largest seed company in the world. They went from a chemical company to a seed company. And what the danger of that is that they've been buying up many organic seed companies in the world, especially in North America, out in British Columbia, state of California. Now it's becoming very difficult for organic farmers on the West Coast to get organic seeds because of the ownership of Monsanto, which now will not sell a lot of the organic seed from those companies they bought. They bought not long ago a company in California that had 2,500 varieties of organic seeds. So if they cannot control it through patent law, the seed supply, they're going to try and control it through the control or ownership of seed companies. So those are some of the issues that arise. Remember again, you no longer have a choice, no coexistence, and no containment. So that is what happens with the introduction of GMOs. Now, I will guarantee you that if you introduce GMOs, you will use from 3 to 5 times more chemicals than before. Your yields will go down, 15% at least by the Department of Agriculture on soya, at 8 to 10% on rapeseed. Your yields will go down. But the biggest problem and concern we have is the massive increased use of chemicals. I should also say the nutritional value of many of the GMO foods now are only 50% of what it was before. And I won't go into the reason why that has happened. So you have less yields, more chemical use, and less nutritious. That is what the results have been with the introduction of GMOs. We have seen absolutely no benefit, but everything has been a negative. And also, I should say, in 1996, there were buzzwords that I hear now in Europe that was used in Canada and the United States. We'd always have sustainable agriculture. Now we would be able to feed a hungry world. Believe me, if anything's going to lead to more hunger in the world, as we've seen it in North America, it's going to be the introduction of GMOs. So those are some of the issues that have arisen. Now, there's a whole nother side to the introduction of GMOs that you never ever hear about, and it's the social impact it's had on our rural communities. We call it the culture of fear, the breakdown of our rural social fabric. And I think I will take the time just to show you some of the things that also happen. I have a contract here from Monsanto. And in that contract, to me, it's one of the most vicious contracts on the face of the earth. Farmer can never use his own seed. He must buy always the seeds from Monsanto. He must only use Monsanto's chemicals. He must pay Monsanto $15 a hectare license fee on each acre he owns each year. He must permit Monsanto's police force to come on his land for 3 years after he signs his contract, and then Monsanto's police can go into a farmer's granaries, into his fields, get his tax records, his farming records, with or without the farmer's permission. Another clause in here, if something happens to your seed, or the seed was not good, or didn't germinate good, you can never take Monsanto to court for any damages. Another clause here, if a farmer happens to commit some violation of this contract, and Monsanto makes the farmer destroy his crop, or takes all the profit from his crop, the farmer cannot talk about it. Or a gag order, a non-disclosure statement, the same thing that they wanted to get my wife and myself to sign. So you may ask, why would a farmer ever sign a contract like that to give up his rights? A lot of times, the order form was on one side, the contract was on the back side, and believe me, it was in such small print you needed a magnifying glass to read it. But it doesn't matter now whether you sign that contract or not. Under patent law, as was stated, if you are contaminated against your wishes, whether you're an organic farmer or conventional farmer, you fall under the same conditions as if you signed the contract, if you are contaminated. The other issue is that if you now open up a bag of seed, on the bag of seed is this notice. It's in smaller size. And in it, it states, by opening up this bag of seed, you agree to all of the terms and conditions of Monsanto's patent number, so and so. So you don't, if you are contaminated, if you open a bag of seed, you fall under the same conditions if you signed that contract initially. One other point I'm going to bring up, and I think this is the worst thing that could have happened to our farmers. And as a former politician, I think I have never seen something so more vicious than this. Here is a brochure from Monsanto. It's in our farm newspapers, in our Western Canadian farm newspapers. In the United States, they even advertise this on the radio. It states here, if you think your neighbor is growing Monsanto's GMOs without a license, inform on your neighbor to us and we will give you a free gift. And normally in Western Canada, a farmer will get a free leather jacket from Monsanto if he happens to do that for whatever reason to his neighbor. But what happens is not nice. Immediately, Monsanto will send out 2 of their police, we call them gene police on the prairies, to a farmer's home. And they'll say to a farmer, we have this tip or rumor, you might be growing GMO, rapeseed, or soya, whatever. And a farmer will say, I'm an organic farmer. I'm a conventional farmer. I don't want to grow GMOs. I'll have nothing to do with it. And they'll say to a farmer and his wife, you're lying. If you don't confess, we'll take you to court, and the time we're through with you, you won't have a farm left. So what do you think goes through a farmer's mind when these gene police leave or Monsanto's investigators leave a farmer's home? A farmer will think, was it this neighbor or a neighbor here or a neighbor over here that has caused me this trouble? Now you have a suspicion amongst farmers. Farmers scared to talk to one another on coffee row. Farmers scared to talk what they're seeding and back and forth. So you have that whole new suspicion of fear or a culture of fear, the breakdown of our real social fabric by Monsanto's policies. And I often think back in my own family. My grandparents came to Canada about the 1890s. And my grandparents and my parents had to work together with our neighbors to build our country, schools, hospitals, churches, and so on. Now we have that breakdown of our real social fabric. And believe me, I think that social issue is one of the worst things that could have happened with the introduction of GMOs. There are other things they do, and I think I have a few minutes' time. If Monsanto cannot find a farmer at home, they'll get his mailing address through the municipality or county, and they'll mail a farmer this letter. Farmers call these extortion letters. We don't know how many thousands of these have been sent out in North America. But believe me, if anybody has said something negative about Monsanto, you will get a letter from them. Here it states, we have reason to believe that you might be growing Monsanto's GMO without a license. We estimate you have 200 acres, 500 acres. In lieu of us not taking you to court, because we think you might be growing GMOs, send us $200,000, $100,000 in 2 weeks' time, and we may or may not take you to court. Can you imagine the fear in a farm family when they get a letter from a billion-dollar corporation, send us $100,000 in 2 weeks' time? Another clause, you're not allowed to show this letter to anyone or we will fine you. So that is what's going on. We never thought this could happen to us in Canada. We're a first world country. But believe me, it is happening not only in our country, but also in the United States. And I think it's important. There's a lot more issues than just patent laws or GMO seeds or plants, but the whole issue of control of people and fear in people by a corporation. What better way than to control people than by fear? It has not been easy for my wife and I to stand up to Monsanto for 10 years. And if it wouldn't have been for my wife, I don't think I could have never done it myself without my family, my neighbors, and so on. And many times I felt like giving up, and I'd come home from traveling around the world, and I was realizing, what am I doing to my wife, my friends, and so on by standing up to Monsanto? My friends were scared to talk to me. Every time they talked to me, they would look to see maybe somebody from Monsanto was watching. So it was a living hell, as I said, for 7 years. What else did they do to us? I said before, they tried to seize our land, our house, our machinery, and so on. They would watch us all day long, many times when we worked in our fields. They would sit in their vehicles along the road. They would come into our driveway and watch what my wife was doing all day long. She would get phone calls, you better watch it, they're going to get you. Many other forums. They would go to our neighbors and say, if you support Percy and Louise Schmeiser, we're going to come after you, and by the time we're through with you, you won't have a farm left. So you can imagine the fear that we went through. We were scared they were going to torch us house. They were going to break my legs from the threats that we were receiving. Worst of all, my wife and I were speaking at Parliament in Cape Town in South Africa. And coming out of the assembly, we ran face to face with one of Monsanto's representatives from Johannesburg. And he was really, we say he lost his cool. And he came up to us and to me and my wife, shook his fist in my wife's face, my face, and said, nobody stands up to Monsanto. We're going to get you, and we're going to destroy both of you somehow, someday. So you can imagine how we felt. So those are some of the issues. There's many other issues that arise when you introduce GMOs. I haven't come here this evening from Canada to tell you what to do. I'm here to tell you what has happened to us as Canadian farmers in 1996. We didn't have anybody to come and tell us what would happen, but you have that benefit. And the choice you make now will be your choice. But also, we are at a fork in the road. The choice you make today will affect generations and generations to come, because talking to many scientists around the world, we don't know yet if it ever can be recalled. You cannot say, well, we'll try it for 2 years. If we don't like it, we'll stop. It doesn't work that way. You introduce it, it's over, and you no longer, I guarantee you, will have any organic farmers. So it's an important choice that you have to make now here in England. My wife and I have 5 children, 15 grandchildren. Sorry. The land might be fertile in Canada, but it's not that fertile. Anyway, we have 5 children and we have 15 grandchildren, 1 great-grandchild and 1 on the way. And we often looked at this in the last 10 years. What kind of a legacy do we really want to the future generations? Do we want our future generations, our children, our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, to have air and water, soil, and so on, food with poisons? I don't think any of us here tonight want to leave that kind of a legacy, and neither do we. And that's why we've given all that we have, the rest of our lives, to fight for the rights of people, to always have good food, safe food, and so on. And so that we can leave that legacy, as I said. But you have to do something now. Tomorrow, it will be too late. So with that, again, as long as my wife is 76, she'll be 77 in a short time, so I'll be 78. And we gave a commitment back in 1998 when we stood up to Monsanto that as long as we have life in us, we're going to go down fighting for the rights of people and farmers all over the world in regards that they always have safe food and be able to use their seed from year to year. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you.